On this Tuesday night, a potential seismic shift in abortion law in the U.S. The leaked Supreme Court draft ruling and the reaction.
Our deepest fears are coming true.
The unborn are human, and we've been killing them en masse.
Plus, the potential ripple effects in Canada. Relief after being rescued from a besieged steel plant.
You can't imagine how scary it is.
And in Chernihiv, Ukraine, one man who keeps reliving the war. Decision Ontario when that province heads to the polls. And a hockey legend laid to rest.
When Guy Lafleur walked into a room, jaws dropped.
The amazing power and influence of Guy Lafleur on and off the ice.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. For decades, the law about abortion in the United States has been settled. It is legal. Well, now there are signs of a seismic shift coming. A draft ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court leaked to the media reveals the top court could be poised to overturn a landmark 1973 ruling called Roe versus Wade, which guarantees the right to abortion across the nation. The leaked document, labeled First Draft, appears to reflect the majority opinion of the court. Justice Samuel Alito states Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. That a Supreme Court ruling was leaked is itself unprecedented. The court today called it a betrayal of the confidences of the court. And this draft, written in February, could still change. But those who have long feared a conservative majority on the court intends to make a fundamental shift in law are shaken to their core.
It concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose within the limits of the Supreme Court decision. But even more, equally as profound is the rationale used.
The draft opinion, if it holds, would allow states to declare abortion illegal, and many states already have laws ready to go. There is concern, too, about what message this sends to other countries, including Canada. We'll get to that in a moment, but we begin with Jackson Proskow in Washington.
Neither side in the abortion debate saw this coming, at least not like this. A leaked draft decision suggesting the Supreme Court is about to overturn abortion rights in America.
It's good news for the pro-life movement, something that we've been fighting for almost 50 years to try to overturn Roe.
If they're willing to undo 50 years of precedent of safe abortion access for all of us across this country, what else are they willing to do?
The draft argues the right to abortion is not deeply rooted in American history or traditions. It says abortion rights should be decided by politicians, not the courts. The ruling is not yet final, but could be by summer. If Roe is ultimately overturned, more than half the states are considered certain or likely to ban abortion entirely. 13 states already have so-called trigger bans on the books that take effect automatically the moment Roe is overturned. Many of those states make no exception for cases of rape or incest.
Legally, what we're talking about is a movement that's willing to go so far in state legislatures as to criminally charge people with murder in cases of miscarriage and stillbirth.
Stunning as it is, progressives say the fight is not just about abortion. The conservative majority court could simply find reason to overturn other rights like same-sex marriage or access to contraceptives.
It basically says all the decisions relating to your private life, who you marry, whether or not you decide to conceive a child or not, whether or not you can have an abortion.
Yet reversing Roe is at odds with the views of most Americans. Polls show a majority oppose overturning it, and most approve of at least some abortion rights.
The blame for this decision falls squarely on Senate Republicans who spent years pushing extremist judges.
Democrats are now pushing legislation to guarantee abortion rights in law. They may have the support of at least some Republicans who seemed surprised that conservative justices they nominated to the court would support such drastic changes to American life.
If it goes in the direction that this leaked copy has indicated, I will just tell you that it rocks my confidence in the court right now.
Jackson, there are some people, including Republican senators, who believe recent Supreme Court nominees lied to the public about their views on reproductive rights during their confirmation hearings, which took place under oath. So what happens with that? What happens next?
Well, Donna, it all depends on what the final ruling looks like later on this summer. But as you heard, some Republicans are signaling they may in fact vote in favor of federal legislation to support abortion rights. Not clear they would have the votes with Democrats to get that passed, though. We should point out that Republicans themselves largely seem uncertain with what to do with all of this. They're not touting this as some big victory right now. Instead, they would rather make the message about the leak from the Supreme Court itself.
All right, Jackson in Washington, thanks. Other countries are watching closely what's happening in the U.S. Here in Canada, abortion is legal and it's a publicly funded medical procedure, though access does vary depending on where you live. Those who believe in a woman's right to choose are on high alert, fearing rights could be eroded here too. Heather Yourex-West reports.
Autumn Reinhardt Simpson has spent much of her life helping people access abortions, first in her home country of the United States, and now from where she lives in Edmonton, Alberta.
Here in Alberta, we have 3 clinics, but they are focused in Calgary and Edmonton, so we still have a hard time getting people in rural areas into the cities for their appointments.
Abortions are one of the most common surgical procedures in Canada. They are funded under provincial health plans and legally available across the country. But often access is not simple.
A lot of times I'm just kind of driving around the province, picking people up or things like that. So that takes time, that takes gas, that takes food, that takes childcare. You've just got all of these logistics to think about that can present really severe barriers, especially for Indigenous people and especially Indigenous people living outside of the city.
And if the procedure becomes harder to access in the United States, it could compound matters in Canada.
In Canada nowadays, the vast majority of abortions, among Canadians happens in Canada, but very rarely for late diagnoses of abnormal pregnancies or a late diagnosis of pregnancy in a socially complicated situation. Patients may have the option of traveling to the United States.
While national statistics are not available, more than 100 women in Ontario have traveled to the U.S. for an abortion in the last 10 years. And as U.S. state abortion bans take effect, advocates expect to see more patients coming here.
I think most of the traveling in the United States will go towards the nearest possible option. So for some people that will be Canada, and so that will of course put pressure on an already overburdened health system here in our own country.
I suspect that we'll see an increase in orders for mifepristone across the United States that could translate to drug shortages for the abortion pill in Canada.
While Roe v. Wade passed in 1973, abortions didn't become widely and legally accessible in Canada until 1989. 30 years later, while that right remains in place, it's one Canadian advocates say should not be taken for granted. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Now to Russia's war in Ukraine. The largest city in western Ukraine has been hit by a series of airstrikes. Flames lit up the night sky over Lviv after the Russian missile strikes. The city's mayor says 3 electrical substations were among the damaged buildings, and that caused a power outage. And the Russian assault on the steel plant in Mariupol, which only let up briefly to allow a few dozen civilians to escape, is still going on. There is some good news about those who got out on Sunday. They finally arrived in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia today. Redmond Shannon reports, and a warning, some of the images in his story are upsetting.
The relief is palpable. Some show it with smiles, others with tears. After a gruelling journey through back roads and Russian army checkpoints, the Azovstal evacuees arrived to safety. The end of a 2-month nightmare beneath the bombarded steelworks in Mariupol.
You can't imagine how scary it is when you sit in the shelter in a wet and damp basement, which is bouncing, shaking. Every night we went to sleep and thought about whether we would survive and wake up.
The United Nations says 101 civilians, including 17 children, made it out, most of them arriving in Zaporizhzhia.
We would have hoped that much more people would be able to join the convoy and to get out of hell.
Some estimates say around 200 civilians are still inside. The Red Cross says the renewed bombardment of the plant since Sunday prevents any more evacuations.
I'm extremely concerned with the image we have seen today. We have seen that hostilities have resumed.
Ukrainian forces claim those hostilities now include tanks and ground troops, and that 2 civilian women were killed overnight.
I have one message for you today. Ukraine will win.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson gave a virtual address to Ukraine's parliament, the first foreign leader to do so since Russia's invasion in February.
You have proved them completely wrong. Every one of those military experts who said that Ukraine would fall.
Johnson pledged another $500 million in new military aid to Ukraine. France's Emmanuel Macron, meanwhile, spent 2 hours on the phone with Vladimir Putin, demanding but not getting a ceasefire agreement from the Russian leader. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
A plea for help coming up. The aid a flood-ravaged First Nation is asking for. Plus, when people in Canada's largest province go to the polls.
For a total today of 16,801 and a 20-day total of $476,985. Congratulations.
Wow, Canadian Matea Roach has done it again. That was her 20th win on Jeopardy! And the 23-year-old now has the 5th longest winning run on the quiz show's history. She's got her sights set on the next milestone, the 4th longest winning streak. She needs 33 straight wins to make it. Ontario's Premier is hoping for another win, too. Ontario's 43rd general election campaign is getting underway. Premier Doug Ford met with the Lieutenant Governor to formally dissolve the province's legislature today. The election will happen on the 2nd of June. Tonight, Eric Sorensen looks at who is in the running and the political dynamics at play in Canada's biggest province.
Feeling good. Over 4 years, Doug Ford has dug himself in and out of controversies, from COVID restrictions to health care funding to paving over green space.
Yes, to putting shovels in the ground for new highways.
But Ontario has largely survived the big issue, the pandemic, and polls show the Premier who steered the province through it is now positioned to win re-election.
Folks, June the 2nd, we'll have a choice. And we're going to make sure this province continues to prosper.
The challenge for official opposition leader Andrea Horwath is that her party, the NDP, has only once formed government in Ontario.
Job number 1 is to defeat Doug Ford.
Job number 2 for Horwath is to hold off Stephen Del Duca, who's trying to revive the Liberal Party after its massive defeat in 2018.
People respond favorably to our plan and to the dynamic new candidates who are running with me.
For Del Duca and Horwath, Plan A is to win. Plan B is to not finish third.
Obviously, he'll want to become premier, but the real battle is going to be for second place. Who's going to form official opposition?
Premier Ford has Ontario history on his side.
In the last century, Conservatives have won 2/3 of all Ontario provincial elections, and every newly elected Conservative government has been re-elected to a second term. And there is another distinctive voting pattern here. For the past 60 years, the party in power in Ottawa has been like a trigger for Ontario to go the opposite way. In 15 of the last 16 provincial elections, Ontario voters have picked a premier of a different stripe from the sitting Prime Minister. With Pierre Trudeau came Conservative Bill Davis. Mulroney saw Peterson and Ray. Chrétien came, and then so did Mike Harris. Conservative Stephen Harper spent a decade opposite Liberal premiers, and only after Justin Trudeau was elected did Conservatives move back into the Ontario Premier's office.
It's an interesting thing that we do as Canadians. In a sense, we don't want to give too much power to one political ideology or to one group of people.
And as previous Ontario premiers have discovered, smooth relations with the other team in Ottawa can be good politics.
You know, I don't know. I just put all these political stripes aside. We work so well together.
For Ontarians, there's nothing contradictory going one way federally and another provincially. And the current premier hopes that history holds in 2022. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
In Manitoba, the Peguis First Nation is calling on the federal government to deploy immediate military aid to help the community deal with major spring flooding. The First Nation, 170 kilometers north of Winnipeg, is one of 18 communities under a state of emergency. On Monday, more than 1,000 people who live there were ordered to leave their homes. The province says the Fisher River has now peaked, but there's still a risk of more ice jams that could back up the water. Hundreds of homes are surrounded and roads are completely submerged. Chief Glenn Hudson says he's never seen it this bad. The water, he says, is higher than the flood disaster in his community in 2011. The scars of Chernihiv ahead, the trauma of survivors in a war-torn Ukrainian city.
You're watching Global National.
There's so much sadness and violence in Ukraine, but occasional moments like this, too. This is the first dance of a couple who got married in the hospital. 23-year-old Oksana Balandina, a nurse, lost her legs in a landmine explosion in March as she and her now husband were walking home. The newlyweds are now preparing to go to Germany so she can undergo rehabilitation. All the lives lost and disrupted are hard to take in. One of the hardest hit places in Ukraine is the northern city of Chernihiv. Amnesty International says an airstrike in early March involved at least 8 unguided bombs that indiscriminately hit civilians. The city played a key role in preventing Russian troops from advancing into the capital, Kyiv. And Russia has since retreated from the area. Our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Gamansing got a first-hand look at what was left behind.
Some scars of war are obvious. Charred buildings with gaping holes and shattered glass. Others are buried deep inside survivors.
At the time of the explosion, I was very close to the place.
Ihor Markovich recalls hearing the roar of an airplane engine and seeing it fly low. He didn't need to explain what he saw next. Instead, he showed us his phone and a video transporting us back 2 months to March 3rd. The chaos, the sound of people screaming, the bodies on the ground. The images are hard to watch, but Ihor lived it.
They were lying here at the place where we are standing now. You can see the leg was blown off.
Amnesty International says up to 8 unguided bombs were dropped here, killing at least 47 people. Human Rights Watch was unable to identify any legitimate military targets in the area and concluded the strike could constitute a war crime.
I don't see any logic in this war except to destroy and kill people.
At St. Catherine's Cathedral, worshippers share prayers to keep those on the front lines safe and their families at home supported. Chernihiv was besieged. For weeks it looked bleak. There was no power, no water, or food. 700 deaths here have been directly linked to the war, and those are just the ones that show obvious signs of trauma. Yuri Poluk has worked for more than 20 years in forensics and has never experienced anything like it.
Most of my friends do not believe what happened in our country and want to wake up on 24th of February in peace. They have never seen such things, even in nightmares.
The last of the invading Russian forces retreated in April, but for survivors, the pain is still palpable. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, Chernihiv, Ukraine.
Farewell to the flower. Next, Canadians pay their last respects to a hockey legend. His funeral happened in Montreal, but hockey fans across the country and around the world were paying their respects today to a legend. Guy Lafleur died last month. And as Dan Spector reports, the people who gathered for his funeral today remembered him for much more than his talents on the ice.
As the casket draped in a Montreal Canadiens flag made its way toward Mary Queen of the World Cathedral, hockey fans across generations came to chant his name. Quebec bestowed the honor of a national funeral upon Guy Lafleur, one of its greatest hockey talents, an artist on skates, an athlete with few peers. The flower died of lung cancer April 22nd. He was the centerpiece of the Montreal Canadiens dynasty that won 4 straight Stanley Cups in the mid-70s.
Not only did he play each game to its fullest, he tried to live his life to the fullest off the ice as well.
The guest list a who's who of Hockey Hall of Famers for a moving ceremony that saw Habs legends like Yvan Cournoyer and Patrick Roy deliver eulogies. Lafleur remembered not only for his on-ice prowess, but his humility and generosity.
He's a superstar, but very humble superstar.
I think as good of a hockey player that he was, you knew he was a better person.
That big grin that greeted you every time you saw him.
The Archbishop of Montreal presided over an audience of tremendous influence, hockey leaders and elected officials from every level of government paying their respects.
His contributions to the world around him was legendary and an inspiration to us all.
A generation of fans looked up to the De Mont Blanc. Some braved long lines to pay tribute as he lay in state at the Bell Centre Sunday and Monday. Hundreds watched the service Tuesday from outside.
I'm sad, but I'm happy to see a lot of people paying tribute and respect.
Lafleur's longtime line mate Hall of Famer Steve Shutt served as a pallbearer.
I guess I got another assist. You know, we've been attached to the hip for so many years.
The national funeral a fitting honor even to his lifelong rivals.
It's pretty powerful stuff for not only for hockey, for fans, for our culture in Canada.
As a kid, he was my idol, but as a player, he paved the way.
Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen.